Hi, it's Tom here from Running Physio. I wanted to come and talk to you today about how to work with athletes when they're really reluctant, unwilling, or maybe even unable to change their training. And this can be hard. It can be something we all come across in clinic where we get a clear idea that it's actually the person's training structure, how much they're doing, how hard they're working that's playing a big role in their injury. And yet when we suggest that they change their training, they just seem very reluctant to do it. We get lots of barriers, and actually we struggle to make progress because the training is going to stay at a level that irritates the tissues, and we can't seem to get the athlete to calm it down. And sometimes when that happens, when we're struggling to persuade an athlete to change their training, and they're not really prepared to do it, the relationship between us and that athlete can start to break down as well. We can start to get friction, which we really don't want because we want to be a team together working towards their goals. So I thought I'd do a bit of a video to talk about how we might potentially address that, how we can work together to try and get that training to a manageable level. And also to say that, a lot of people find this as a problem. A lot of people have asked me about this on the courses, on Facebook pages and things, and on Instagram. How do we help persuade runners to reduce their training when they're reluctant to do so? So the first thing is to try and work out, well, why are they so reluctant to change their training? And that's about trying to work out what the drivers are for their training behavior. And this involves having very honest and open discussions with your athlete and asking them simple questions like, why do you train the way that you do? What do you think is important about training? What aspects are the ones that you really want to hold on to and you're desperate to keep in there? What things might you be prepared to let go? And these questions start to build an idea, a picture of how the person sees their training, what they believe they need to be doing in their training. You can ask them what they think about easy sessions. What do they think about recovery and rest? How do they plan that into their schedule? And those questions can be pretty revealing as well. Because quite often what I find in athletes that are perhaps unwilling or unable to change their training is that they often believe they need to be working hard in every single session. They have that kind of go hard or go home attitude. They often undervalue rest and recovery, so they don't include it in there. And they often feel that they need to be doing very high volume training to get the performance benefits that they expect. So these questions can be revealing and start to open up conversations around their training. And we can start to maybe see if we can softly challenge some of those training beliefs. So for example, it's not true that we need to be pushing hard in every session. As a runner, sometimes I feel like that I have to be pushing hard in every session, but actually that's not likely to lead to benefits in performance. There's evidence from people like Steven Sealer that we can get some of the optimal performance benefits with up to around 80% of our training at relatively low intensity and maybe only 20% at high intensity. So we don't need to push hard in every session. And this is a conversation I'll often have with these athletes to say that a lot of the benefits that you might want from your training are going to happen at low intensity sessions. So if you're wanting to build your endurance and your fitness, you're going to get it from low intensity sessions. If you want more of those, tissue specific adaptations, such as things like increased capillary blood flow, increased mitochondrial numbers, that's going to come from your low intensity sessions as well. And if you push hard in every session, that doesn't mean an increase in performance. Actually, sometimes it can mean a detriment to performance because it increases your fatigue levels and it increases your likelihood to end up injured. And when you're injured, it's very difficult to train at the level that you want to, really. So I think that's the first point here. Try and identify the drivers behind the training behavior and try and discuss the person's beliefs around training to look for ways in which perhaps you can start to softly challenge those beliefs to start to change their training behavior. Also think outside of the individual because it's not always coming from that person. They may have people around them, people they're training with, possibly coaches that are pushing them very hard. So it might be that you need to work with the team around them too, or perhaps have a meeting together to try and make sure everyone's on the same page. Because one thing we know that leads to performance benefits is consistency. we're much better consistently training over a long period of time than we are working really hard for a few weeks, but then having to stop because of fatigue or injury. So if we can get everyone on board and work with consistency in the right training structure, that is actually going to lead to better performance for them as well. Also, because they often undervalue recovery, we might need to big up recovery a little bit and tell them about the benefits of improved recovery. That actually, if you reduce your fatigue, it can and will improve your performance. If you sleep more, there's now a growing body of evidence that if we sleep more, it actually leads to performance benefits. So if their goal from their training is to actually perform better, they may actually do better focusing on improving their recovery rather than pushing hard in every single run. So if we can identify those drivers, start to reframe recovery, rest, and low intensity sessions in a more positive light, that might help facilitate some training change for these individuals. Second point is that it's better to empathize and educate than it is to be judgmental. And I think this is sometimes something that happens. We get frustrated because we want to help, but we're not feeling listened to if the runner or the athlete doesn't want to change their training in response to our advice. So when we get frustrated, we change how we communicate. We start becoming a bit like a kind of primary school teacher, sort of wagging our finger and tutting and saying, well, if you're not going to listen to me, you're not going to get better. But that doesn't facilitate things. It doesn't improve the relationship. Instead, actually, we want to find out, well, why do you want to train like this? How do you think it's going to actually help your goals? Empathize with their choices, recognize why they would choose these things, because often when you talk to someone, you can really get to why they want to do it, why it's important to them. So if we approach it with empathy and then give people the information to make a more informed choice, that is always going to work better, in my opinion at least, than being judgmental and critical. Now, a third point is this really interesting research paper that's been published recently that I really wanted to share with you. When I read it, I thought it would be a good one to talk about. So this is work by De Jong et al. In 2020. And one of the things I really like about this paper is they look at passion and running. And they talk about this model of passion where you've got harmonious passion, which is thought generally to be very positive, and obsessive passion for our sport, which can have lots of negative impacts, really. So harmonious passion, this is defined by the idea that the person controls the activity, whereas in obsessive passion, it's the activity that controls the person. In harmonious passion, running is actually in harmony with other aspects of your life. So overall, it's a positive. But in obsessive passion, running can actually cause conflict with other areas of life. And people can continue to run despite it coming at the expense of other activities, family time, work, even health. I've known people continue to run through serious injuries like stress fractures. So they continue to run despite the problems that it results with. Harmonious passion, often runners are going to be able to stop. They are in control, so they can choose to stop if they need to. Whereas in obsessive passion for runners, they may be unable to stop. And actually, this obsessive passion is a key predictor of exercise addiction, which may well be linked to it. In harmonious passion, we see flexible persistence. And I really like this term, actually. I think it's something that we can all benefit from, this idea of flexible persistence. So working towards a goal, but being flexible enough in your approach to recognize when a new approach is needed, when actually rest and recovery is more useful. Versus obsessive passion in our athletes where there's rigid persistence. I'm going to keep going no matter what. Now, you could see in some situations that may be beneficial if you're looking at real elite performance and someone preparing for, say, an Olympic gold medal or something like that. They need to have that come hell or high water idea. But it's not something that's easy to maintain over a longer period of time. That rigid persistence of just going to keep going no matter what. We do generally, for most people, need to be a bit more flexible. And as a result, then, that harmonious passion they talk about here is related to more positive psychological outcomes, whereas there can be negative psychological and physical consequences of this obsessive passion if we keep going regardless of the negative effects it's having on our life, on our physical and mental well-being. Now, in this recent paper from De Jong et al., they actually found that harmoniously passionate runners who were able to mentally recover well after running were 28% less likely to report a running injury, while obsessively passionate runners were 36% more likely to report a running injury. So it does seem that that obsessive passion for running, if it leads to high levels of training with inadequate levels of recovery, may well lead to injury. But also fair to say, when you look into the details of that paper a bit more, that it's a small factor, so it's going to be one of many factors involved in the development of running injury. So we shouldn't sort of pin it all on that particular thing. But I think one of the things that's quite nice about this paper is you can ask athletes to reflect on their relationship with their sport. And you can talk to them about these things and say, actually, look, there's these, two approaches we've got here: harmonious passion, maybe more of an obsessive passion approach. Can you recognize any of these characteristics in yourself? Where would you put yourself? Are you able to stop running? Will you keep running despite the negative consequences it has? Do you have control over your running, or does it have control over you? If we can get them to reflect upon their relationship with sport and identify that perhaps it needs to change, that's where we're really going to be able to get the change that we want. It's always more powerful coming from their own realization than from us trying to force a change upon them. So I might actually put that, show them that slide, talk it through with them and see if they can start to pick out aspects in there that they can start to change to improve their relationship with sport and be more prepared to alter their training to bring it down to a manageable level. And of course, we need to explain to people why. Why do we want them to be training a bit less? And we need to make it make sense to them. So explain the relationship between training and injury and pain, and why it matters to them and their specific case. So explain how, if we're overloading the tendon or the bone or the joint or whichever area is sensitive at the moment, how it's likely to keep it sensitive. But if we can bring it down to the right level, it allows us to keep the sport going without irritating the tissues too much. So a big role for education, empathy, and understanding here. And then the final point I'd like to make on this is team up with your runners, with their coaches, and also, if you can, with a mental health professional. If you're really struggling to change the way someone is training, if you suspect maybe they're developing an unhealthy relationship with their sport or there's elements of exercise addiction, why not work with a sports psychologist or a counselor, work as a team together to try and help that person change their training? Because if all of the work you're doing around empathy, education, describing why it's important to change just really isn't working and you don't feel you're getting anywhere, you may need a more integrated team approach, and you may need to think about whether there really is more of an exercise addiction component here that we need to work with. Okay. That's it from me today. We put a link to the free resources there in the title. You'll also find it's there in my Instagram bio and things as well. There's a collection of great free videos that we've put together with Clinical Edge. So go and have a look at those if you want to find out a bit more about Achilles tendinopathy, low back pain in athletes, and also lateral hip pain. Great series there. Check that out. And I look forward to hearing your comments and questions after the video. Okay, bye for now.